All right, welcome to On the Bench after some video technical difficulties, Chris. What a start to this one, too. Much like FSU season, am I right? Too soon? Too
Too
soon.
soon.
All right, well, welcome back from Ireland, Chris. Not the maybe not the heart of the trip that you wanted. Hopefully, you still enjoyed yourself and were still able to have fun. Let's get into the game. The Seminoles lose 24-21 to Georgia Tech, and in disappointing fashion. It wasn't even just that you lost. I think it was the way you lost, the lack of physicality, the lack of toughness in general. It was kind of a sobering game in that regard. You were there. Let's get your quick thoughts on it as we get going here.
I thought Ja'Kai Douglas played well. I thought Shaheem Brown did an excellent job cleaning things up, and I thought Ryan Fitzgerald kicked the what out of it and did a fantastic job. And that clutch one at the end of the half was quite fun to watch. Enjoyed the McGregor walk. I believe he busted it out. Beyond that, not really anything good. I mean, let's just cut right through it. I'm not going to go play by play and say this or that. I thought Georgia Tech outcoached FSU on both sides of the football. I thought Georgia Tech completely controlled tempo and did what Georgia Tech wanted and got it when they had to have it. I thought Brent Key allowed FSU to kind of play right into his hands, and FSU did that. And I thought that was ultra disappointing. I thought FSU's physicality was pathetically poor. I thought FSU's speed looked really poor. That probably more than anything blew me away. Every time that Haynes King wanted to get to the edge, he got to the edge. Anytime they wanted to get to the second level, they got to the second level. Now, plenty of it's technique, fundamental stuff they got to clean up too. They got to be better at the point of attack on both sides of the ball without a shadow of a doubt. But they looked really flat-footed at times. And I know some people questioning effort or saying laziness. I don't want to get that far ahead. I feel like that's something you need to see repetitively. But obviously, I did not think it was very good in the sense of them getting to the spot when they had to get to the spot. There were some personnel decisions that, plain and simple, at the beginning of the game were kind of head scratching for me. And Omar Graham was one of those. At the beginning of the game, I did not understand why he was getting the opportunity he was. And then for him to play nearly 3 dozen snaps, it made no sense to me. As someone who got the opportunity to watch spring and watch the fall, I view Omar Graham as FSU's fourth or fifth linebacker. And I think I've written that consistently. I think I've been ultra consistent with that. And that, more than anything, was one of those things that was kind of dumbfounding to me. He wasn't the sole one that was like that, but he was probably the most egregious one in the sense where it just didn't make sense to me. I didn't understand why, when you're playing a team where you need to plug holes, maybe at times Justin Cryer doesn't play more, or if you need more athleticism, why Blake Nicholson and or Cam Riley doesn't play more. I just didn't understand it. And, you know, there wasn't really a unit outside of the kicker that I thought played particularly well.
Yeah, it was again, it was the way it looked to me. If you had told me that Florida State would lose, because I had Georgia Tech covering, this wasn't. I don't want to make everything a one-game referendum. Like it was.
Especially a 7 or 8 possession game, which was one
That
of
was.
the biggest issues on the day. You can't allow a game to be that limited in possessions.
I did the podcast before. You probably didn't listen to it, Chris. Zach and I did a podcast on Friday morning, and my anxiety was that I didn't think the defense looked particularly good that week, and that concerned me a little bit. But I was told, no, you're just being Brendan right now, by a few different people, and that's fine. I've earned that. But then the variance of just like you're going overseas, you got this time difference, and then the weather ended up being a weird thing too. And there's just a lot of different variables, and when that happens, that the more variables, the less favorable for the better team. And Georgia Tech's game plan told you they thought Florida State was the better team. They wanted to shorten it. To your point, Chris, Mike Norvell played into Georgia Tech's hand. This is about the 5th or 6th time I think FSU's played a fewer than 60 play game on offense in the last season and change now, season in a game. Some of that happened after the Jordan Travis injury, but FSU's lack of plays with what should be superior talent is something to monitor as a trend. But in general, I think people have asked like what we were surprised about. We didn't think this was going to be a juggernaut of a team. I had this as a 9-win team that's recalibrating to probably 7 or 8 now. After you lose to a team that you probably should have won, to a team that probably is going to win 7 or 8 games itself at this point. That's what they won last year, and they're better than last year. But still, the way it looked, you being pushed around the way you were in the trenches, especially early on, the missed tackles, and again, we can say field conditions or whatever, but you had, I
Both
think
teams were on the same field.
Well, Georgia Tech missed a lot of tackles too, but they hit explosives off of the missed tackles, and they came in crucial moments. And that's where we start talking about situational football and stuff. It wasn't clean, and it wasn't good enough.
It wasn't solely missed tackles. I mean, there's multiple plays. Zach Pyron goal line play. What are you doing defensively there? Why are you not stacking the line? Why are you not being more aggressive? I know DJ Lundy had a chance on that play, but that's putting it all on one guy instead of throwing numbers at it. I didn't feel FSU threw numbers at the problem very often on today, personally.
Yeah, they're in the
Late in the game when you know
usage
they're
of
trying to set up the field goal and somehow you allow the chunk that you allowed on that play, like that can't happen.
yeah.
It's just plain simple. In that moment, FSU preps for situational stuff constantly on both sides of the ball. It's every Wednesday they do situational, and it's infused into a lot of practices beyond solely one day. You can't have that. And then the physicality issue is another thing that you go back to practice. Does FSU need to start tackling in practice more often? I think the answer is yes.
Can
Multiple
they?
year opener. Yes, you can. The concern is obviously keeping guys upright, and I understand why they do it. But multiple years in a row, they've had an opener where they have not tackled particularly well. And I think that speaks to a lack of physicality in the sense of tackling, in the sense of inside run being more aggressive in the banging fashion in practices where it permeates into games. And when you're playing a team like Georgia Tech wanted a fight. Brent Key, offensive line coach, who's a head coach, wanted a fight. And they lined up and fought for the entire 110 plays between the two teams. And FSU did not look prepared to do that particularly well.
Georgia Tech's yards per carry before contact was 2.61 on average.
Yeah,
I mean, let
a lot
that
of
sink
broken
in.
tackles, a lot of running away from people.
Yeah, I mean, 12 force
And it
forced
felt like
tackles.
FSU constantly got tackled the first opportunity on a lot of plays where if it slips a little bit further, it's a bigger play, much bigger play. 5-yard gains becoming 8-yard gains, things like
Listen,
that.
another aspect of it, man, was just not just the physicality, because again, to me, that was the most striking. That's the most alarming. That's the most like that reverberates beyond just one game. The speed, and we've seen the speed in practice. We know that like that's legit. They have GPS data that says like that's legit, and that but it looked very. It was striking how different that was. Georgia Tech looked like the faster team, and I think that goes back to mindset with how they approached. They brought the fight to Florida State. Your team kind of cowered. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
you got to set the edge on Haynes
frustrating.
King, or he's going to win to the edge. He's very good at it. And on the interior, you got to be physical against the run because Jamal Haynes is going to finish runs. He's going to run hard, even though he's not an enormous guy by any stretch, but he runs really hard and he gets great head of steam. He's a guy who builds to speed very quickly as he attacks the line of scrimmage. And you know, FSU just didn't really show up, for lack of a better term, and it's ultra disappointing. I mean, I did not walk into Aviva expecting that game to play in the fashion it played. I thought Georgia Tech would score around 21 points. I think I picked them to score 21 points. I certainly didn't expect FSU to only, or I'm sorry, they scored 24 points, obviously. I didn't expect FSU to only score 21 points. I thought offensively, FSU, great success on that opening drive, did a good job carving out space, creating some big plays, and then that never really happened again. Georgia Tech sort of, countered and figured it out, and FSU really struggled to figure it out. And it's funny to use word counter because FSU had a great deal of no success with counter, while Georgia Tech seemingly had a lot of success with counter on the day.
Yeah, for people who don't know, I mean, counter is FSU's bread and butter. Chris, what was your line?
In the land of curry gold, FSU butter turned to margin or something like
Something
that. I
like
don't know.
that.
I was in a much better place than I am right now at
Than
8:30
you
in the
are
morning
after the jet
after
lag
all
and
day
landing at
flying.
1 o'clock in the morning, and now we're recording at 8 o'clock. Yeah, I got you. Well, I'll try to spruce things up a little bit then and carry you a little bit then with my energy. Counter's a huge deal for what Florida State wants to do, and it has been for years. And I'm looking at numbers now that point to since 2022, it's dropped off drastically. And Saturday was alarming in the sense that you ran it, I think, 12 times on 58 plays. So that was a good chunk of your opportunities was you were
20% of
trying to
your
run
play
for
calls.
20%. Yeah. And you got hit on average in the backfield. Like your negative yards per contact, or your contact average yards per contact before carry. Yards per carry before contact. There we go. Was negative 0.3. So you were hit in the backfield on average. Georgia Tech, by the way, was awesome at running counter. Georgia Tech was really good. That's what they wanted to do. A lot of it was quarterback counter. They have a good running quarterback. Guess what? You're about to play another good running quarterback this upcoming week. So that being a thing that they do well isn't a one-off that you're going to face in the season. But like I think that that contrast, Chris, speaks very clearly to the difference in the two teams' physicality in the game. And you watch the way FSU took on counter, how often their defensive ends or linebackers were letting the first polar, whether it was a tackle or guard, strike them at around the line of scrimmage. And then vice versa. When you talk about Georgia Tech bringing the fight to Florida State, their defensive end was crashing and hitting you in the backfield and basically log jamming what you were trying to do. And that was done
They were
consistently.
also throwing people into the gaps, and they were being aggressive with people at the line of scrimmage. And
So Georgia
FSU
Tech's
did not really feel that way, truthfully.
Georgia Tech's first time they put at least 7 to 8 defenders in the box was on the Lawrence Toafili touchdown at the start of the game, 28-yard play.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that was a counter or not. I forget off the top of my head. It was DJ checks into that play. He sees pressure coming down. He checks, and they make it's a good call, and it's a touchdown. After that, Georgia Tech did that a majority of the game. At least half the time, they had an extra defender in the box, and it took FSU about 3 possessions, which was a lot in this game. It's a good chunk of your possessions to start pushing the ball vertically some to try to keep them honest. So Georgia Tech dares you to do something, whether it was weather. We have to ask Mike about this, and when we talked to him on Wednesday. But like, why were you hesitant to push the ball downfield? Was it not trusting your quarterback, not trusting your wide receivers? Was it weather? What was it? Because it was there. They were daring you to do it based on just the math, the number probability. So that's another aspect of we talk about things lingering throughout the season here. Like, do you trust your quarterback or your passing game, or do you not? And if you don't, like we were there at practice, I would understand why you don't, but I don't. It surprised me to that extent, I guess. We saw that level of hesitation from them for that duration of the game.
Yeah, I always thought going into the season they would set up a pass with a run, and you come out and have the first drive success, especially running the ball. But to be as timid in the play calling in the sense of pushing the ball after the first series until essentially the last 30 seconds of the first half it was surprising to me.
Yeah.
And to your point on Georgia Tech, because they were stacking the box, and it wasn't like they were just putting a lot of bodies in the box. They were putting them on the line of scrimmage. They were immediately basically hand in dirt or standing up at the line of scrimmage. They were leaving the middle relatively open. They were playing essentially a too high shell a lot of times with safeties deep, but there was nothing in the middle of the field there. Corners were on their islands, nickel was on their island, safeties were deep essentially as a safety type. But if FSU wanted to go to the middle, the opportunities were there. We saw FSU go to the middle on the final offensive drive, FSU's best offensive drive after the first one of the game. And they went to the middle twice. The Douglas sit down in the zone where they dropped, I think, 8 on that play. And then obviously the Benson one that sets up the touchdown. It was just amazing to me that FSU didn't seem to go there a little bit earlier. Now, obviously, there's offensive plays that FSU would love to have back. Cam Davis's drop immediately comes to mind. The 4th down conversion where Georgia Tech essentially dared you to go for it, and a phenomenal one tackle was made.
Real quick, Chris, on the Cam Davis play, I just don't want to escape that. Like, he blocked his butt off. There's a ton of he played 12 snaps. Like that's a lot for a true freshman in that type of game. Yes, he needs to make that catch. He's also someone who, if we thought about all his strengths in practice and the things that he does well and the thing that they want to lean on him, yeah, he needs to make that catch. Also, this is a guy who played quarterback in high school. How many times has he caught a football in the last 4 or 5 years? And say in the leverage of that game early on, raining and stuff like that. I don't know if that was an optimal use of your personnel. That might be
especially in a deep state
picky, but anyways, it struck me in real time.
Yeah, and then, getting to the trenches of the offensive line, Keandre Jones really struggled in pass pro. They weren't good as a group at pulling. Some of that was slipping. Some of that was just being slow to the spot. It was an ultra disappointing thing to watch. And watching it in real time, when Georgia Tech got the ball back with 6:33 left, I thought Georgia Tech was going to win on a field goal. I thought the only way FSU won that game was Georgia Tech screwing up, and they really tried with the bad snap. Where Marvin's in the backfield has an opportunity there to put him down for even a bigger loss. He gets a few yards back, and then they hit a play to set up the field goal. That's what it felt like.
Thing,
I mean,
Chris,
it felt like, FSU went down, did what they had to do to score to tie it. But when they gave the ball back with the way that game had played in the prior, about 53 and a half minutes, it felt 100% like Georgia Tech's going to have this ball. They're going to have it as the clock expires, and it's going to be coming off somebody's foot. And the question is whether or not Aiden Burr, I believe is their kicker, makes it. And that to me was disappointing, that having watched 54 minutes, knowing exactly. And I know in most situations like that, team is going to try to burn the clock and win, like instead of giving you an opportunity. But it felt like Georgia Tech had dictated the way they played that game to that point where it was almost a certainty that as long as the kick went, they were winning that game. And obviously they did.
Yeah, their scoring drives. I mean, the first one for them, 3 minutes, 24 seconds. Then the next one, a couple drives later, 7 minutes and 53 seconds. Then their final two possessions of the game, 6:22 and 6:33. I mean, that's
I am interested if Mike intended to try to push tempo at all in the third quarter, but obviously FSU didn't execute offensively very well in the third quarter. DJ
FSU's
struggled.
final touchdown drive, and it's partially because you had to convert on fourth down twice,
Yeah.
but that was 8 minutes. And so what I have here pulled up for people who are watching on the YouTube channel is this is Game on Paper, which does a really good job of live updates of like percentiles of EPA, so that's expected points added, success rate, things like that. Dark green's really good. Light green's good. As you get into light green, neutral color, yeah, it's more mid tier, and then purple, dark purple, pinkish colors are bad. And these numbers here that I'm pointing to, Chris, uh, all indicates that this wasn't like a fluky game. You know what I mean? Like this isn't. It was a three score game.
Well,
FSU
to
had
me,
chances to win it, but Georgia Tech, I mean, their success rate was 98th percentile.
yeah.
They were consistently successful. Your stuff rate on defense was in the first percentile. You were
Yeah,
fourth.
and the havoc rate, I was going to say those two at the bottom there, to me, speak to the line issues that you had on the day where you weren't good. And I know those are both more defensive minded, but in general, you just weren't very good at that on the day. And that's usually FSU's bread and butter is winning at the line of scrimmage, especially on defense. And they didn't. And
Yeah,
the thing to me, like, and I've been thinking about this, I think since I walked out of Aviva about 10 o'clock Ireland time or 11 o'clock Ireland time on Saturday is like, is it a one-off or is it indicative of who and what they are? And I think the answer is in the middle.
somewhere. Yeah, in the
I
middle.
don't want to dismiss it as a one-off. FSU's had essentially a lump of coal in their bag for this season at some point, more than likely, where they weren't going to play very well. I didn't think it would be the first time out. I didn't think it would be against Georgia Tech. Not to diminish Georgia Tech, I thought they played a really good game, but I view Georgia Tech as, at best like a fifth, sixth opponent on FSC's schedule if I'm ranking the schedule. But I mean, it was concerning, and it is concerning,
Yeah,
and there's things that can be fixed, whether it's effort or just physicality or just want to.
can it?
Um,
Like
it
and I'm
can,
not saying it's not
but it's a
going to.
choice.
I just don't. I wouldn't flippantly say that can be fixed because there
I
are
mean, it can
people.
be fixed. Will it be fixed is a whole different
All right,
question.
just making
Um,
sure we're on the same page there.
yeah,
Okay.
no, I'm not saying I'm not convinced they walk out and play spectacular well against BC, especially with Castellano's ability to bother him some of the ways that Haynes King did. Which obviously isn't a great feeling, especially with FSU being BC's first game and BC being under a new head coach. So they can, yes, but will they is up to them. I mean, I didn't expect FSU to play that poorly, plain and simple. I actually thought FSU was going to come out and play pretty damn well. They usually play well in openers under Mike. They've, the tackling stuff not being in that equation. Like they do have trouble tackling, but they tend to perform at a higher level.
They had more missed tackles in that opener than they did in their last 3 openers combined.
Jesus, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I can
So,
believe it, but that's painfully brutal.
if we go back, Adam Fuller gave some breadcrumbs after that first scrimmage. There's 2 things
Yeah, he
that
did
stand
not
out.
like tackling that scrimmage.
It
Yeah.
was a really late press conference. Tackling was a little concerning to him, and they allowed like a 18, 17, 20 play drive, something like that.
Yeah.
Like there were some signs. Maybe we should have been more vocal and circling around those, but there were some signs and some concerns. The way I want to proceed with this, Chris, is okay. Those are our thoughts generally on the game. We have a lot of users with a lot of questions, and we'll
Yeah,
be
let's
able to
fire
provide
away.
good answers on some. We may not be able to have answers on others. Before we do, I have to tell you, I was writing the post game recap. I was doing the 3 things we learned, feeling a little dejected. My wife comes into my office with a package. So what's this? It was a bottle of Chattanooga Whiskey's Pinot Noir finish bottle. I swear they got it right after the game, and I was like, "Oh man, I would love to drink a bunch of this right now." But I had to write and be professional. So I'm waiting until next weekend. But I've just been sniffing it, Chris, and nosing it, and being a weirdo, and just keep sniffing out of the bottle. It's one of the best smelling whiskeys I probably ever have smelt before. I don't know if that's a ringing endorsement or not.
I did my part for Chattanooga whiskey. I walked by the Chattanooga gate at Charlotte Airport last night and just yelled whiskey at it. So
No.
as I
They're
walked
proud of a bunch
briskly
of
to
bottles.
E13.
But this is a bottle that they're really proud of. It's their Pinot Noir finished one. It's from Russian River. Say that 10 times fast. Russian River Valley of Sonoma County wine company. And so it's finished in red wine barrels. And they have their toasted mash bill. They have their wheated mash bill. They have their standard bourbon mash bill. It all kind of blends together into this really sweet treat. It's got brown sugar on the nose, cola. Like it smells divine. So that's out in stores right now. Go ahead and pick yourself up a bottle if you feel so inclined. I think that'll be probably one of the better bottles they come out with this year. It's really, really awesome.
Yeah, and I'm sure there'll be some buyer Sonnone in this, so I'll help Sonnone out here. That's brought to you by the Turner Group. So if you have buying or selling needs in the state of Florida, especially in Central Florida, reach out to Colin and company at the Turner Group. They do a phenomenal job. I always mention their Instagram. I think it's a great display of what they do as a company, how they go about working hard for their clients. Zach, who works with us, obviously has personal experience with actually using them on the purchasing side of things. It went exquisitely well, according to him. We've had some other people mention their interest in them or having previously worked with the Turner Group, and they're
another Zach bought a house through them too. So 2 Zachs are already on to make it a hat trick, a Zach trick, if you will.
All right, let's get into these questions.
Colin was really sad after the game, guys. Buy a house, make him feel better, please. Starting off with B. Gurrence. Yes, I have a question. What the hell?
Yeah. Boy, did that feel like the feeling. Yeah.
Let's
Again,
see.
hopefully it's not indicative of what the next 11 will be. Hopefully, but that is to be determined.
All right, Tampa Knoll 776. From watching many practices, I feel like he's taking a little jab at us here. What are some things that really surprised you against Georgia Tech that we did and did not do? So the physicality and first
Omar Graham starting would be one of them.
Okay, you want to start there? Okay, that's
yeah. I mean, okay. I've been adamant about that since the game ended. Every time I think I've written about the linebackers in the preseason, I've referred to Omar Graham essentially as the 4th or 5th guy with a caveat of the staff likes him, because the staff always does go out of their way to talk about him. Maybe I should have read that clue better. Maybe that's on me. But it blew my mind that he started and then played 3 dozen snaps. And it blows my mind that he played 3 dozen snaps with the way he played. And I feel bad. I hate piling on an individual guy, but he played incredibly poorly and was a major reason for some of Georgia Tech's individual success.
We can differentiate and not make it personal, and also say there's elements that we can't discuss with some players that like could factor into performance, and also just things that we don't know intimately with scheme stuff too. But
Justin
there's
Pryor played, Cam Riley played, Blake Nicholson played, Sean Murphy didn't dress. He was, on the sideline in a uniform and shorts. But Sean's not a guy that I had factored in there when I had talked about it. Like, to me, it was always, DJ's clearly the 1, and then 2 to 5 was a group of Cam Riley, who is a little bit more of a pass coverage guy than a run stuff guy, in my opinion. Blake Nicholson, really good athlete, still coming along. Did a great job with the play with Daniel Lyons. Didn't mention that earlier. Very good play. And then Justin Cryer, who I think is phenomenal at filling holes, ending plays, being good with gap responsibility. And then Omar. And it just blew my mind in this case, in this game, why, if you want to deal basically with Jamal Haynes directly ahead to your running, that you did not go more with Cryer, or if you wanted to combat King working laterally, that you didn't go with Nicholson more. I don't get it now. And I've rewatched the game a couple times over, watched a bunch of cut-ups as we've discussed it as a group. I don't understand it. To me, personnel decisions are what they are. I'm always going to have my opinion versus what they do, versus what a depth chart says. But Graham did not make sense to me in the moment, and it didn't make sense to me with the way it played out, and it doesn't make sense to me days later.
My point being is that we can separate being critical of a player and critical of a performance, right? They're necessarily the same thing. Omar Graham, when he was on the field, FSU allowed 6.2 yards per rush. When he was off the field, it was at 2.9 yards per rush. Let's see. Chief Leaf, in all seriousness, do you think the coaching staff makes any major changes to personnel based on Georgia Tech results, or will they deem it too small a sample size? So in past years, actually against a Georgia Tech a few years ago, in year 1, and granted they didn't have the history with the team then because it was their first season, but they had a bunch of changes after the first game. It was a first game loss, and like Kalen DeLoach started that year and ended up getting benched, and it took him a full year to get back into the lineup. So there's a history of them being willing to make some changes. How big of changes though do you think we see, Chris?
I'm not of the belief that it will be drastic. I don't think that's the way Mike reacts, and ultimately he's one who has final say on that. But like the depth chart and what they played were some differences, right?
Right.
Omar was listed as a second team or guy, for example.
Yeah, I mean there were some, and I think that's what we see. Like I don't think we don't see Omar Graham again. I think we probably see him 10 snaps, and you start seeing other guys more. Is probably
I mean,
how that
others I
kind of.
would think of as Devontae Brown.
Yeah,
You're gonna need athleticism and tackling back there at safety along with Shaheem if guys aren't cleaning things up front. And to me,
mhm.
Devontae isn't that guy for you.
No,
I know I'm a Hussey homer, and Hussey has his issues too, but like he's another one. Nickel, Knowles played better than Little in this game, but Little sample size was relatively small. What 9-10 snaps? Had two really bad
Little
ones that I
was
recall.
graded really poorly in the snaps he had to be.
Yeah, he had the one where he got burnt on the ball that went too long towards the end zone, and he had a really awful
He
rep.
slips a lot too. That's one thing, like, that was in the spring game, he slipped once and allowed that pass to Jackson West. I noticed that a couple times in practice, and then there was 2 times where he slipped in the game too, and I know
I,
again, field conditions, but I'm not sure what's happening there.
I know the defensive line played incredibly poorly in the sense of the expectations for them, um, but I don't think you see drastic changes there. Maybe a
Part
little
of it is
bit more rotation at the interior. Maybe a guy like KJ Sampson sees some snaps, for
yeah,
example.
part of it is you
Um,
can't. You don't have the
yeah,
depth there that's catch up to you a little bit to where you don't have the
well,
physicality and the
you felt
size.
great about the ones you had on top. I mean,
Yeah.
they were talking about the 3 defensive ends and then Byron Turner, and,
Mhm.
Sione didn't play very well. Pat wasn't impactful, and
I thought Sione was okay, in what he was asked to do.
yeah, but he's such an edge setter for you, and
Well, that's
he
what he
didn't have
does.
a great but he didn't have a great day doing that. He had a
Uh,
mixed day. I don't wanna act like it was
It was the Georgia Tech averaged about 2.5 yards per carry when Sione was on the field versus about 6 and change when Marv was on the field. Like, the sample size is skewed because it's not a lot of snaps that we're looking
right.
at, but, I know who
Marvin's
I would
day is
want
so different if
wins
he cleans up the fumble or if he gets home on King
on
when
the
he's
sack, yeah.
hitting him as he completes that pass to, I believe, convert third down for them.
Georgia Tech ran right at Marvin that first
Yeah.
drive. It was about 4 or 5 plays right to him without a
So
lot
do we
of.
think that was to go after Mervin or to simply go away from the side of Pat? Which to me, I think it's going after Mervin because I don't think Pat's a guy that's ultra respected as a run stopper. I
They
think
played
Pat's
against
viewed
Marvin
more as
Jones Jr. last year.
yeah, when he was at Georgia.
Yeah.
All right, next question.
Noel Chris 2020. Let's not talk about the game for a minute, please. Buyer Sonnone, AZ Thomas gets drafted before Travis Hunter. Oh, I don't know, man.
Let's focus on the game. No
Okay,
offense.
yeah. Sponsored by the Turner Group. So there's some stuff about Omar snaps. All right, so TPW Austin wants us to delve into offensive play calling options. Are we fine with it? Concerned? He has some thoughts on it as well, but
I thought it was
he
ultra
talked about the
timid.
middle of the field being vacated. So we touched on that, but let's
Yeah.
dive into it. That was concerning to us was how
I thought it was
tentative they
ultra
were.
timid. I do wonder how much of it is because they just struggled to run the ball with any effectiveness after the first drive. What 1.54 per rush after the first drive for the remainder of the game. I think it was over 26 rushes, 40 yards. Um, and I do believe the passing game is going to be generated off the rushing attack. The thing that surprised me was the lack of vertical attack before the last 30 seconds of the half. I could not believe I wholeheartedly expected with the way the first drive went for FSU to come out on that second drive and push it vertically at some point in the first 3 downs or the first 3 plays of that drive. Um, and they didn't. And I just, that really, really surprised me based on how they would do things in practices at times, based on the strengths of this team. And also because you started noticing Georgia Tech creeping more people towards the box and giving you a little bit more opportunities of one-on-ones or at least space where it was 1-on-2, but you're supposed to be built on speed, as we heard throughout the preseason. And, we know they have fast guys and a guy like Malik Benson, Jalen Brown, and a few others where you attack it. And they really didn't at that point. They did try that some later on, very mixed results. I think they were 2 for 5 on throws over 15 or more yards, I think, on the day. Is that correct?
That sounds right. They were magnified. And I don't think DJ played poorly, but he didn't play at a high level either. And there was a couple big shots downfield, which we said there was going to be times where he missed layups, and there were two. There was the one to Ja'Kai Douglas on that deep pattern to the left corner of the end zone where he just puts too little on it, and then the miss to Malik Benson streaking downfield on a go pattern.
FSU
Those are the
won't
two I
be
can think of
good.
down.
Won't be any good this year if they're solely relying on DJU to win them games offensively.
And that was never the like that's not what he's
Right.
supposed to be.
Right.
And we knew there was going to be ups and downs with his accuracy, even though he can push the ball downfield. With the accuracy, you have to hit on some of those. And we talked about that in the podcast at the roundtable podcast. Like we thought there'd be a game or two that you lose because you're not able to capitalize on the downfield stuff. But I also thought there'd be more opportunities in the course of a game than two.
Yeah, I do think there was a degree of FSU thought they were gonna, especially after the first drive, we're gonna run the ball with some level of
Run. Yeah.
effectiveness consistently through the day, and it just went away and never
Do
came back.
you remember that? Like because we try to talk about and just me being who I am, my personality about the worst case scenario, like behind the scenes. Like we try to not put it out there publicly of the best case or worst case and try to have kind of in the middle. But we'll talk about this all. But we did kind of put a light on it. I remember very vividly, Chris, being in Jacksonville on the patio out back. It was raining. I had a little Chattanooga whiskey. We were doing a podcast and we were talking about where the team was midway through the preseason.
Yeah, you
And
voicing concerns about if they can't run it, they're gonna be in a little bit of world of hurt.
on both sides, because they were running
Mhm.
the ball so well in practice, that would also mean that your rush defense was going to have concerns.
And that
And
goes
that was
back to the
kind of
element of practice where outside of scrimmages, it's relatively thud.
yeah.
And so, like, how well are you running it? And the people in the building thought they were going to run the ball well, and
Yeah.
obviously felt confident about the D line, its capability against both the run and the pass. And those things did not show up in game one.
And the defensive line, one last thing on it too. It's like, yes, we thought that the defensive line was going to be very talented and good, and it still can be. Right, this is just one game. Uh, and it's not just even FSU. This isn't a matter of like FSU miscalculating on it either. I don't want to throw like people on staff under the bus either. They're NFL scouts walking through practice who are fixated on that defensive line, and they're telling national reporters, "Hey, this is a immensely talented." There's NFL like people who are paid money to break down the NFL draft who were saying you got multiple first round draft picks on that defensive line.
Beyond flat footedness, they seem, from a technique and fundamental standpoint, something that's harped on a ton within this program, to be very poor against Georgia Tech.
They played high
And
a lot, let
yeah,
people come
and
to their
got
bodies.
turned a ton.
Yeah,
Basically weren't disruptive in the sense of if Georgia Tech wanted to dictate movement to a certain direction where they, either cut through it or worked around it, they basically got moved more often than not. Yeah, that was there was not any people moving going on from FSU's defensive line, and that's a group, especially on the interior, that's supposed to be capable of doing that. And we've seen them do that, but given that we've seen them do that for a few of them, like Adele Jackson is in practice, and for others, it's Josh Farmer. It's in some games and stuff. So.
Osceola 239 has a few questions. Two of them I want to touch on. One quickly, maybe one a little bit more in depth. With I don't know if we know the full answer yet, but was first one is was everyone wrong on Georgia Tech, or did we have a nuclear bad level game?
I think the answer there is in the middle. I like Georgia Tech's offense. I think it's a pain in the ass to prepare for, and given it's one of those where, like, if they get in a early deficit, it's probably not built to be super uh, effective. But when you play a game like they did against FSU, it can be really effective. Haynes is a pain in both Jamal Haynes and Haynes King are a
Haynes
pain
is
in the rear to deal with. Uh, Eric, the wide receiver, is a talented kid. Rutherford's a capable player too. They have enough pieces there, and the O line's big enough and physical enough. Now they gotta stay healthy. I don't think their depth up front is great on the offensive line. Defensively, I had absolutely no respect for Georgia Tech going into the game based on what they were last year. I didn't think they had gone out and upgraded a ton. I did like the addition of Warren Burrell in the secondary. I thought that made that the strength of that football team. And then I like the linebacker, Zach. I believe it's Efron, who won ACC Player of the Week.
Did you
What
say it's Zach Efron?
Effin? Is it Effin? It's like
It's definitely not Zach
EFFON.
Efron. He looks
Whatever. Zach something.
he looks like a transformer. Like he looks
The
like
guy who made a bunch
a
of
90s
tackles and was
action
really good
figure.
in the game.
He was
I
awesome.
don't obsess over opposition's names on defense as much as numbers, especially in the front seven. He's really good. But their line doing what they did to FSU was a surprise to me of Georgia Tech in that game. I don't want to
Yeah.
build Georgia Tech into something they're not until they are it.
But
But
that,
they can
that
be
was
a
a
pain.
team.
They can be a thorn. And they play hard football. Like they are such a definition of their coach. He's an offensive line minded guy who wants to run the ball and wants to be physical and wants to be basically aggressive towards the opponent, and they are that. They displayed that in the moment. I think that defense also wanted to go improve something because they did stink last year, and it seems like the hire of Tyler Santucci, who they got from Duke, who did not go with Elko to A&M, was beneficial for them. And I noticed Key went out of his way to praise Santucci after the game, and players also spoke highly of him. So you'll play hard for somebody you're motivated for in a lot of cases, and it seemed to be that way for Tech. But I think the answer to that question is in the middle of those two. FSU didn't go nuclear per se, but man, they played pretty poorly.
They played below our even what we thought their floor
But
would be.
I think it was a reaction on FSU's part to how Georgia Tech played too.
Yeah, and that's
I
not.
think the expectation of how FSU thought that game was going to play versus how it really did play were two very different things.
And think about where you were last year, the season opener against LSU, and the physicality and the bully ball you played in that game. And that's
Yeah.
kind of what this program's been built on. And that's a hat tip to Mike Norvell's personality and what he pushes, every day in practice and culturally. And for that to kind of get ripped away from you in the first data set that we had is concerning. Is concerning because that speaks to something a little bit deeper than just what the game was. Do you have people who are willing to dig deep? And there are people on that in this program who I would call trench buddies. Like a Darius Washington, Rydell Williams, Shaheem Brown. Like there's people who I know are going Az Thomas, who I know are going to fight even if they're not playing their best game, who you can lean on. There's others who I want to see what this looks like moving forward. Georgia Tech might be good this year. Like they won 6 games last year, regular season, 7 in a bowl game, beat UCF, which is just a hell of a thing for anyone to do, really. And they bring back everyone on offense. So this is a team that's going to win 7 or 8 games most likely. So it wasn't a bad team, but your FSU and your expectations were 9 to 10. So that is what it is. Like it was not to standard. The other question that Osceola 239 asks is he wants to talk about the recruiting portal usage and if we've reached a point where this year it bit us in the butt a little bit. Was this game a one-off or is it a bigger problem? Everyone is using the portal now and markets have changed. Our unwillingness to pay up concerns me long-term, not only with high school kids, but now transfers. So real quick, the pay up narrative, I think FSU is going to have a top 10-ish roster in terms of salary this year, but we don't know that for sure. But I don't think it's a roster that is cheap. I don't think it's a $20 million roster like Ohio State, and we believe some other programs are pretty close to it, maybe even a couple on FSU's schedule. But I don't think it's an inexpensive roster by any means. Now, if you want to start wondering if some of the allocations were done to maximize your funds, I think you could probably discuss that. But the larger point, Chris, is high school recruiting, portal recruiting. Is FSU some vulnerability with the roster building mechanism? What are your thoughts? Is it too early to tell, or are there things that are concerning you to some extent based on this one game data set?
Well, you have about 6 dozen returning players on this roster from last year. That includes some walk-ons, obviously. And then obviously you added in a hefty portal class. I think it was 17 total, if I remember the number correctly. I don't think this portal class will hit at the rate of past portal classes. So I guess that is a trend that you need to obviously keep an eye on and consider moving forward with the way you build your roster. To the bigger question of it all, I think there's a degree of reading the market and understand. So I'll use Jeremiah Byers as an example. We know who and what Jeremiah Byers is at this point. He's good a lot of snaps. He's atrocious a few snaps. And man, are they painful. And that was viewed as, I believe, based on our rankings and I think the industry's rankings, as the second or third best tackle in that portal class. You got to develop at some positions. Like there's some spots where you've got to have the growth. And I've always viewed the portal for FSU as a way to go get solid 2 deep players, including some starters, and fill in positions of need, basically band-aiding it in a given year. I do think there's a degree of FSU has been good enough now over 2 years where you want to start flipping that on its head somewhat, where it needs to be a little more high school oriented, a little less portal. And the biggest thing is you can't have misses. Like when you're living year to year on roster building, you can't have misses. You can't have guys you bring in for that individual year who aren't going to help you. And I think there may be a couple in this class who are that.
Well,
You also go ahead.
too like unsustainably good at not missing in the transfer portal over the last couple of years.
Yeah,
So
they
this
were
might be
ahead. They
yeah,
were
this
ahead
might
of
be
the
a
college
return
game in
curse
that
a little
regard.
bit.
Yeah. FSU is not going to go away from using the portal. The way they're recruiting this cycle, currently speaking, is indicative of them not going away from using the portal because they're not just taking the take. But I do think there are positions where they have to be better at high school recruiting to make sure that the roster is properly filled top to bottom. Basically, the portal needs to be not 17 guys, in my opinion. Like that, to me, that's too many at this point for FSU and where they are as a program building. I still think they're going to use the portal to be effective. They still need to go to some degree big game hunting or solid two deep guys at a decent rate who are going to help you win football games because you need depth to win football games. I think they're a little too comfortable at times of having small boards in high school, missing on said board, relying on portal. I think there needs to be a recalculation of how those two things factor. And then, hey, let's bring up linebacker. I think it's pretty fair to say I'm wrong about linebacker at this point. I'm comfortable about that. Send this to Zach. It'll make him feel a lot better. But like that showed, like you went and got Sean Murphy and he wasn't available. But even if he was, I wasn't expecting him to contribute in that factor. I don't view him as a guy who is any higher than Omar Graham in my calculation of that room. So we're saying 5th to 6th. You know, I like Cam Riley. That is a portal addition that I think will help them at that position. But like, you know, you knew you were losing your two linebackers last year. You know who and what DJ Lundy is, and Lundy's gotten better as a player throughout his career here and earned the right to be a starter. But like, there's a degree of you put everything on either a portal guy or two hitting, or two guys who were freshmen last year being your guy, and that's a hell of a lot to ask. And then you run Omar Graham out there. So like, yeah, I think there needs to be a evolution of how they go about using those things. And I think that comes with success and the changing of the market and everything else that comes with it. But you can't be ultra comfortable being in major recruiting battles and losing them and thinking, oh, we'll just go to portal. Because the portal doesn't always provide, as Zach likes to say.
This goes back to that point. This goes back to something that we've said multiple times. I remember in the offseason, Chris, you and I discussed this, and we got a lot of pushback at the time. Was saying we didn't think this was an all-in year based on what you had coming back and how
Right.
they were building. And so last season
Nick
was an
Swartz is
all-in.
in town if it's all in year,
Yeah,
right?
although
Because he's the
maybe
first guy you went for at that position.
that
You
recruitment
knew
got
you
weird.
knew the possibility of Marvin existed, but in
That
general, at
recruitment
defensive
got
end, where
weird
you
and the
went with 3,
communication fell apart. So I'm not sure if you came in to
right? But
with
my point more so is the bidding war idea of it all, because it is
yeah,
a
and that's
pay-for-play
what I'm saying is
era that we're living in.
I don't think you got to the point where you were able to throw crazy amount of money to get the number one defensive end in the portal, and that's
But I don't think they had intentions of doing that this past cycle.
but
Cam
like,
Ward's another
and
example.
that's
You
like,
weren't willing to wait or pay for Cam Ward, and
yeah,
obviously there was a weird dynamic there with the possibility in the NFL. You took DJU, who you were comfortable with when you went into the situation of needing a quarterback. Those were your two. And that played out very much as described in the sense of you recruited both of them. You reached a point where you needed to have one. You weren't sure if one was going to stay in the college game. You also knew the price tag was going to be leveraged by the fact of the NFL stuff with them. And you took the other. And you felt comfortable with that because you were going to build around him. You went and got Malik Benson, Jalen Brown, so on and so forth. Yeah. Like, I don't have an issue with their roster building. I like how they do it. I think there are tweaks that need to come with the reading how the portal has played out, knowing who and what you are, knowing what's coming with the college game, also with the paying of players and the house settlement and all of those things. I just think you can evolve with it, and I hope FSU doesn't get a little stuck because they have had past success with their theory of how they do it. I hope they do continue to evolve with it,
I think my
and they're
point was
relatively smart. I hope they do, and I think they will. But I recent recruiting returns of the last couple months make me question whether or not that's the case because I think they're a little ultra comfortable with we'll go get that in the portal.
there. If it was an all-in year, like the linebacker from Georgia who ended up going to Kentucky, I think
Yeah,
that's an
3 names.
example. That's an example you go and you
Dumas
throw.
Johnson.
Yeah, that's it. Dumas Johnson, JDJ, I think.
Yeah.
But that's probably like the type of like you throw, uh, you become the highest bidder at that guy to go ahead and get him if you think you're pushing for a national title type of season. The Penny Boone, the running back who ended up, weird stuff at Louisville and ends up at
But
UCF.
I
But
think that's reading a guy correctly in Boone's
there's
case.
some of that, but there was
I think there was an understanding that a lot comes with that.
if you came in and were the highest bidder for him right away, he would have just come here, I think,
Probably true.
and probably.
But I
So,
don't think
anyways, I'm
that's
just
the
saying
position when I do it. But I get your point.
there are a few signs that were like, that's not exactly what this is. Is you're focusing highly on character and you want to develop guys, and that's my other point was that the portal usage this year versus maybe more so than some other years, and they go ahead and they've made their bones on multi-year transfers. They found value in that before others did. But it was a little different. It was like a multi-year transfer. Like a Dylan Gibbons had been around for a while, even though he hadn't played a lot at Notre Dame. He'd been around for a while. Johnny Wilson had 2 years, I think, at Arizona State with a decent amount of playing time. And so you were seeing guys like that you can kind of reclaim and mold, and we can get our hands on them and turn them into something that they're not. For the most part, I feel like this class had a lot more of, you just haven't seen them a ton. You're going more like on high school evaluations. You're kind of like bringing the gang back together type of deal.
Yeah.
Not into
That was true with
totality.
Brown, with Little. I mean, Marvin's
Uh,
obviously no one that falls into that
Marvin
boat.
played though.
TJ Ferguson's another one.
Ferguson's a guy who didn't
Uh,
play a ton. He was there for a while, but he didn't play a ton.
they knew
Who
of Benson out of
Murphy
JUCO
Murphy
because
was the
of
guy who
Jaden
hadn't
Jones'
played it.
recruitment.
Murphy's a guy who hadn't played very
Yeah.
much, and there was some high school. So a lot of that was kind of banking. And so, anyways, there might be a longer development process that we have to kind of play out and see, and that also probably means there's more variance to it as well.
I do want to add one final note on this. I don't want people to take this as us saying the roster is not good. I'm not of that opinion. The roster, I think, was good enough to beat Georgia Tech and did not play very well. I think there's just simply moving forward in a program that had won 23 games over the last 2 years entering this season. You're allowed to recruit at a different level and approach things a little differently than you had to fix it. And they did a good job fixing it. And I don't know. I'd like to see some degree of evolution with their approach, especially to the high school ranks. I'm not here for paying a Josh Petty the reported figure that was out there. I understand that. But if you're not going to pay that guy that figure, you got to figure out who you can pay a certain figure that you value in that room, who you believe will be good for you long term in that room out of high school ranks. When it's a very good offensive tackle year and you had a ton of them on campus, and instead you're going to come away with probably not a whole lot of returns on your efforts in recruiting those guys. To me, I don't love always the depth of the boards they build, but I do look at, they bring in 50 guys in June, and if they're only going to hit on 14, that's 28%. Like, did you really work that hard to only hit on 28%? To me, that's where this discussion is. And I know some of it's recruiting for the future too because of the portal.
Yeah, but that percentage probably needs to be up about 10 percentage
40.
points. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Where's the question? Okay, so I'm going to preface this by I'm not entirely sure, but I think I can help paint a picture. Maybe Chris can do it more clearly than I can. Apollo asks us to talk about the specific responsibilities that Alex Atkins has on game day versus what Norvell does for the offense, and how Atkins' absence impacted Georgia Tech in upcoming games. Do you want to start?
Alex does a lot of pre-planning of the game along with Mike and others in the offensive staff, and obviously helps in practice implement. Multiple people in practice wear the headphones to help the offense when they're in it, especially now with the communication helmet to helmet. But that communication is Mike Norvell's and always is Mike Norvell's. That's how it's designed. I think the biggest thing with the absence of Atkins is just the voice on the sideline, the voice interacting with those guys. And, obviously as O linemen respect them. Like there's a certain level of that built through practices with them. But I think Alex also carries weight with other guys. We've in the past with Jordan, for example, we know of him and JT having conversations and stuff and those things. I just think it's a loss of a pretty significant voice on your sideline when he's not there. I don't think it drastically changed how FSU played that game or approached that game, but maybe in that moment when the O-line needed a little, pep talk, for lack of a better term, they probably did miss him to a degree. Not to say that Gabe Fertitta and others in that room aren't capable of delivering messages and coaching and everything, because they are. They work hand in hand with Alex Atkins. I just think Atkins is the guy. He is a fundamental guy of that offensive line group and a guy who's basically the number 2 of the offensive play column.
Yeah, and it's not. This isn't an indictment on Fertitta or anyone else on the staff. It's like if Alex Atkins isn't there, that's one less set of eyes and one of your most valuable. Like he's the second highest paid assistant on the roster for a reason. Him and Gabe work extremely well together. They've worked together for a long time. There's a lot of trust. And so all of a sudden, Gabe's having to do things Alex was doing, and then Gabe's not doing what he normally, you know what I mean? So there's this trickle down effect. That was something we talked about before the game. Someone did a buy or Sonnone whether that would be significant, and I was like, I buy. Like, yes, like you are missing your offensive line coach and your offensive coordinator. Like that is significant. And Mike calls the plays. Mike calls the plays. Is your finger up, Chris, that you're leaving, or that okay, you're taking the call? So I'll just keep rambling then and keep going. But that is significant to some extent because he is one of the best coaches that you have in the program, and he's coached for a long time, and he has a really good rapport with that room. So yeah, like that makes a difference for sure. And we thought it would make a difference. How profound, maybe we're seeing that. I don't know. J Rod asked, when will Norvell see what everyone else sees and start making changes to his coaching staff?
I'm not a firm believer in Mike Norvell making changes to his coaching staff because he's not really shown a propensity to do that in his time at FSU. A change, sure, maybe. But yeah, I'm not expecting sweeping changes.
I will say
I think the only way sweeping changes happens is an atrocious season that's far below the expectations or anything of that. And that is sub 500 to me.
I do need the linebackers to not be awful in future games.
You're there to coach. You don't do the other thing well. So
that's why I've defended Randy Shannon when people harp on the recruiting, which has been extremely poor. It's like, well, he maximizes what he has and develops it. That what happened on Saturday cannot continue to happen, or else then what are you doing at that point? So that is something that needs to be better moving forward. Wonton noodle soup. How long until Norvell realizes counter doesn't suit this group? We went over the numbers. I'll do something over year with it, but like that's alarming. That's what you kind of built your identity around, and teams have taken it away from you. And I can't put my finger on why. Whether it's back in 2022, Rob Scott was healthier.
Second puller was slow.
You had Dylan Gibbons, and those were two very smart. There is a element to that, but Dylan Gibbons and Robert Scott weren't elite athletes running counter when you were good at it. I think they're really good at processing, and I think they're very good because when you counter, I don't think it's there's a moving target as far as I can understand it, and so it's not a guaranteed. Hey, I hit this guy, you hit this guy. It depends on what the defense does and where you see them. The first two defenders show up, and then the running back makes a read off of what you've done on it. Again, I'm not an expert on this, but that is a dynamic that I think you haven't been as good as the guys who are moving, processing it as much in the last couple of years. So that's something I think you miss.
I think this group is much more built for one guy pulling and going somewhere to give you an extra body or working north-south.
I think so too, based on the size you have, and maybe we see more of that, and maybe that lends itself to more. So, DJ seemed good on the RPO stuff. There was some low throws with the RPO, but some of he had a glance route to Tron, and so maybe that vertical running attack lends itself more to some of that. Bobby Bowden, Ball, which loss was worse, this one or Jacksonville State? I think I know where you're coming from there because of the expectations for this. Well, the expectations are a little different, but the Jacksonville State one is only one of those made Chris Nee go, "Oh boy," under his breath, and just the air came out of him like that deflated something. Rays fan, do we finally see a shift in how? Oh, I read that one. Sorry, I'm skipping over some that have kind of addressed what we've already talked about. Luxemac asks, "How is the team feeling after this loss? Was there a come to Jesus moment?"
I've left him alone. I figured we get Mike and the coordinators on Wednesday. We'll reconvene for practices there in the coming days too. Check it out there. I didn't I wasn't
I
doing any investigative reporting in Ireland. I mean,
I've done
I
some
saw
if you're
some people
curious.
after the game, and there was I mean, different guys react different ways. There were some guys that were very unhappy on that field walking off. There were other guys that looked a little shell shocked, and there were other guys that, day in the office, time to go home.
Um, I've talked to a few people. I think there's admittance that, yeah, physicality was an issue. I know Mike publicly didn't say that afterwards. I don't think he will, but I don't think that anyone, who's overseeing elements of this program is comfortable with the physicality. Disappointment was another phrase that was thrown around. I think they're realistic of like, yeah, there was just things that we missed, things that we can do better. And what we've seen consistently under Mike Norvell programs, and I wrote about it some before the season with the coaching staff, was like when they were 0-4, it's like you just kind of keep doing the same thing that you've been doing from a consistency messaging standpoint. And I think that's going to be the approach. And I'm curious to see, like, that does add a wrinkle of fascination to what this week against Boston College, what next Monday is going to look like. What are we talking about a week from today on Tuesday morning? Is did guys respond to that? It's going to be fascinating. Okay, this is a question that I don't know if we're gonna have a great answer to it, but let's see what we can do. Florida State forever. Pretty simple question to me. How is this team so big and fast but played so soft? We should dominate a team like that at the point of attack. Yeah, man. I don't disagree with you.
Everybody's got a plan to get hit in the mouth. I mean, FSU came out and was physical on the first drive, offensive line
Offensively,
wise.
yeah.
I didn't feel like defensively they ever were very physical, truthfully. Um, yeah, it's the way they are built, the way Florida State is built on the front four, it should never ever look like it did on Saturday.
How much are you
I
missing
That's a
the
poor answer, I know, and
personalities?
I apologize, but, like, it's the simple one. They shouldn't look that way. There should there should not be an element of guys just constantly getting whooped at the line of scrimmage, and that happened, and that's to me, a want to factor, and we can talk about coaching, and there are certainly technique fundamentals, things they could do. They could have thrown numbers at it, which is something I thought they should have done defensively, so there's all of those elements. But ultimately, when it's one-on-one, who wants it? And FSU wasn't very good at wanting it.
How much on defense are you missing? I'm gonna throw the names out here and let me know
Braden
what you think of
Fisk,
these.
tons. Jared Verse, yes.
Kalen DeLoach, Tatum Bethune.
Well, yeah, a linebacker, but I think on the D
No, but
line,
no, but I'm talking about just an
even
identity, like
Fabian Lovett. Fabian
Renardo
Fabian Lovett
Renardo
had sort of
Green,
a
Chris.
yes, wholeheartedly, no doubt in
Renardo
the
Green at
secondary, there's
cornerback
an
was a
element of
tone setter. You
physicality.
maybe win the LSU
Yeah.
2022 game because of how physical he was in a few plays that set the tone. Like, that's the kind of stuff that we did not see.
And I thought Shaheem played well. Shaheem is a guy who I thought brought it and did that, and he did a phenomenal
Shaheem
job cleaning up a lot of messes. Dude, he had
Shaheem
a
looked
workload that no man should ever
he
have because
okay,
people in
yes.
front of him feel
Some of the
miserable.
tackling technique was alarming to me for him. That was strange. Like, he's gonna get himself legitimately hurt if he tries that again. That was odd. I'll send some clips later to you. Like, it was strange. He was cleaning up for a lot of stuff, I think. Yes. But you need more. Like,
Oh,
that's
no
a
doubt.
guy. And
They
so
preach
that might
rally to
be
the ball. They preach finish. They preach get it out, takeaways. We didn't see that very often in any form or fashion as a defensive unit.
AVF03, did we get pencil whooped? I mean, last year at this time, I
I
wrote
thought
about
they got
FSU
outcoached, yes.
pencil whooping LSU. What was that, Chris?
I thought they got outcoached, yes.
Yeah.
Brent Key completely dictated what he wanted to do and went and did it. And when Georgia Tech had to have it, they got it. So yes, to me, they did.
Trying to see what else we got here. A lot of these are repeats are happening now. Back to the what the hell question. Someone asked about Greedy. Van said they should try to retain him. Would you rather have him over Earl Little? Right now, it's Buy or Sonnone, but like, I'd rather take Greedy over Earl Little. Earl's been disappointing based on the one game sample size, and he showed elements of physicality in camp. Some of the explosive athleticism that we thought you were getting, I haven't seen yet, and I'm still waiting for it. But Greedy was someone from a physical standpoint, like you knew what, yeah, there were limitations to what he could do, but physicality wise, like you knew he was going to bring it and it was going to be a tone setter at practice. Uh, Bull 813, are either of you concerned that next season could end up being another rebuilding year? They'll have less experience on the quarterback, wide receiver, linebacker, safety, O line. I think you're gearing up. First off, we got a lot of season to go before we get to next season. But I think you've been gearing up towards next year being a more talented roster in general with some of the high school recruiting. Now that has to happen, has to develop. You need to make sure this season doesn't go belly up to where you start losing high school commitments and becoming less attractive in the portal to go ahead and
or losing your
and
current
bolster.
roster.
Yeah, or that too, right? Like those are now things in this day and age you have to consider. Um, but no, I've kind of considered this a transition year where you could win 9 or 10 games still, but you were not going to be a team that was vying for a legitimate shot at a national title. And I thought you were building towards that with a lot of athletic but inexperienced underclassmen. I
Yeah,
still
I
feel
think the goal of this year was going into the season was to compete for the ACC, therefore putting yourself in the discussion of competing for the ACC championship, winning that, getting the automatic bid, presuming you're one of, what is it, 3 or 4 highest conference champions rankings wise gets the automatic bid. I think it's how the new rule set works. I think that's how FSU approached this year, is that sort of being their way to not backdoor their way in, but get in. And you probably could do that with 2 losses. Yeah. It, if FSU, if it starts going sideways, truly sideways for FSU, I think you just have to overly invest in the youth portion of your team and the pieces you know are going to be there next year and truly build for next year. But I think the roster, the goal of the roster going into this season was to be competitive and win at a high clip this year while also prepping yourself to be pretty good next year with the expected additions you add.
got 2 or 3 questions left, and we're hitting an hour here, so we're wrapping up. Uh, Diehard Noel Fanatic 11, how confident are you that Norvell and his style can win a natty at FSU? He ends up talking about some of the recruiting narratives that are out there, linebacker
I,
recruiting, wide
I
receiver
think
recruiting,
winning
O-line.
national championships are incredibly difficult. I think FSU is ultra competitive and has put themselves in position to be in that discussion at the end of the year. Last year was an example of that. I think some of the goals moving forward are still set up that way for them. But winning a national championship is much better than competing for one. And very few people in the college game do it. Like I, Paulie doesn't like that answer from me. Paulie thinks it's a cop out. Do I think Mike can get him there? Yes. Do I think he can do it? No. But I think there's an extremely select few that can for sure. I'm just saying I don't think it's a sure thing.
I mean, the answer is that yes, you can because you were in position to do it last year.
Right.
But whether it's every other year, whether it's every 4 or 5 years, with this, that's what we don't know. We can't answer that definitively, unfortunately. Um, and there might be some things that have to get rectified and fixed with how you go about
You
recruiting, like
you got
Chris
to
alluded
get
to
to the
earlier.
party to have a chance, and I think that's where FSU is under Mike Norvell. But will they be a national championship team under Mike Norvell? I don't. There, you could put pretty much any coach in that position for FSU, and I would struggle to say yes definitively. I just think it's one of those questions that's setting you up for a soundbite that's foolish. Like, can Mike Norvell win a national championship? Yes, he can. Will he? Do I expect him to? No, but I don't really expect any of them to. Hell, I don't think I expected Jimbo to till he did it.
Noel Ryan 6, are you concerned with the lack of effort from Peyton and Jones Jr.?
I thought
Yes,
they were very flat-footed. Um,
I'm concerned by it.
yeah,
And one of those I'm surprised by. The other one, I guess, didn't surprise me as much. And I'll leave it at that. Last one, we'll get out of here. Oh my God, he always tells me how to pronounce his name, and I'm going to butcher it again. Fitting way to end this. Ricastropo Tico. Name one player that absolutely needs to see more snaps the next game. Go ahead, Chris.
I mean, I think Blake Nicholson, because you're playing Castellanos, his athleticism. I think you invest there. Um, yeah. If I had to pick just one, I think I probably land on Blake.
I'll go with Justin Cryer. Like, I need to see what it looks like. I need to know what that is in a game setting, and to see what you have going forward before I can make more educated projections on the linebacker room. So I need to see him about 10 snaps or so. He needs to get in for a series or two.
So you want to plug holes, and I want to play a little bit more wide.
I want to see both of them more.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
I want to see both of them more. And Blake
I'd
played.
also like a change with 22 at safety.
I think we'll probably see that based on how the game ended and who was on the field when you were trying to get off the field, and it was Conrad Hussey was in the game late. So, anyways, Chris got to get going. We've been over an hour for this episode. Hopefully, this was somewhat informative. We're trying to kind of figure things out with you guys. So, thank you for listening, sticking around. Thank you to Chattanooga Whiskey. Can't wait to get into the Pinot Noir finished bottle and the Turner Group. We'll talk to you guys later. Bye.